Hello and welcome to the Jazz History Database. My name is Professor Rich Falco. I'm Director of Jazz Studies at WPI, Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Worcester, Mass., and founder and director of the Jazz History Database. Today is February 16, 2016, and our two guests are very gifted videographers who have produced an extraordinary documentary film that's called Do It, Man, the Story of the Celebrity Club of Rhode Island. Noam Grant is an award-winning videographer who works in the Marketing and Communications Department at the Community College of Rhode Island, where he oversees video production across all campuses. And Dr. Tom Shaker has taught at the collegiate level for almost 30 years, recently retiring as professor and director of the communications program at Dean College in Franklin, Mass., where he taught for 15 years. He's also taught at Northeastern University, Boston University, Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania, and UMass in Boston. He's worked in TV and radio as well, both in Los Angeles, here in Boston area, and in fact throughout New England. Currently, he may be heard on Mondays on the radio station WICN as host of The Soul Serenade. Please welcome our two guests, Noam Grant and Tom Shaker. Well, gentlemen, you made the big trek up from Rhode Island. I was happy to see you able to make it up to campus.
We brought an overnight bag.
You did?
Feel lost. I always do in Worcester, so.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to begin with your involvement in jazz music and how and where you were introduced to it. Maybe we'll start with Noam.
I really didn't have an interest in jazz at all. I mean, I kind of grew up in rock and roll, or grew up with rock and roll back in the 60s, so, I've listened to it on occasion. I've probably learned a little more about it through this project. But obviously, it's part of the story that we're telling about the Celebrity Club.
Yeah, excellent.
I hate jazz. No, I was probably much like you guys. I grew up in a house. We had one stereo, and when I got home from school, I'd play my Grand Funk Railroad records and Led Zeppelin and Blue Oyster Cult. And when my dad got home a couple hours later from work, he'd rip them off the turntable and put on his Billie Holiday and his Glenn Miller and Stan Kenton and his albums that he had, and I hated it. So we always fought like cats and dogs. I wanted to hear my AM top 40 stuff and FM music and rock and roll, and he wanted to hear his jazz. And so it wasn't until I went away to school that I realized, Billie Holiday is a lot better than Grand Funk Railroad. And so then I came back and I rated all his albums and listened to all his stuff and really got into it.
What was it that captivated you? I'm just curious.
Well, my dad was a drummer. He had a lot of like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich stuff and things like that. And, as I got older and listened to more rock and roll, I looked at what some of those people's influences were.
Right.
And they were Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa and, all these guys, Charlie Christian and all these great people. So as I listened to music and kind of traced back where it went, I learned about the history and I learned about the influences that made the music I like. Yeah. So I think that really made a difference for me.
Yeah.
And that really set a thing that has been constant in my life through all my life is that music history that I love.
Yeah.
And that's why this project, the Celebrity Club film, it struck a chord in me so much. But I'm a hack at clarinet and and guitar, but I love to play it. I love to listen to it. I've had in one way, shape, or form, had a jazz show for probably over about 25 years out in Western Mass and in Concord, Mass. I had jazz shows, and everywhere I've taught, I've been involved with a campus radio station, and I've had a show there, usually doing 20s and 30s dance music and jazz music and that sort of thing.
Wow.
Yes.
And you've been at WICN here in Worcester for about 10 years.
About 10 years doing soul. That's kind of a new genre for me, and I love it. And it's that kind of in the 50s there was R&B, in the 40s, and then that turned and doo-wop and gospel music and blues, and that kind of turned into soul music with Ray Charles, and that's the stuff I really love.
Sure.
So on my show on Monday nights, while I don't play jazz, there's I play Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin, and they all play jazz.
Yeah, exactly. It's so much crossover
Yeah,
in
and
language,
it's
you
great
know?
stuff. And you
Absolutely.
never get tired of it. There's always something to learn and always a new song to hear, especially when you have YouTube now, you know?
Yeah, there you go, man.
Yeah.
But it's so vibrant. That music, all of soul, of course, is just such a vibrant and alive music that utilizes improvisation, to say the least.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
On all levels, including the singers. Nothing's really that deeply scripted, if you will. Unlike
Exactly,
a lot of
yeah.
rock bands where. Or cover bands that try to sound exactly like the original recordings. This is so much more free music, so good for you, yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you two connect? I've been curious about this since day one. How
Well-
did you two get together?
This goes back quite a ways, back to 2004. And at that time, you've met Lloyd Kaplan.
Yes, I certainly have.
So Lloyd is a retired music professor from CCRI, and I think he was retired at that time. And I shoot and edit video there, and so he approached me and said that somebody needs to make a film about jazz in Rhode Island. So he actually gave me a copy of this book, and I looked through it. And, for someone that really doesn't know a lot about jazz, it seemed a little overwhelming at first. And the book has a lot of information, but not a lot of stories. But one of them was the Celebrity Club. And then maybe 6 or 7 months into this, he said that there was this guy by the name of Tom Shaker. He was working on rewriting the book, and so he introduced us. And we kind of picked it up from there, and that's when it really kind of took off, I think.
I see. Well, Lloyd's been a guest here,
Yeah.
and we love his book, and we talked a good deal about how he was able to collect materials there and how responsive musicians were to him and so forth. So that was kind of an interesting story in and of itself. But he put you on to Tom then.
Right, and if you look at the book, there, like I said, there's not a lot of stories in there, but
Yeah.
there is an essay about the Celebrity Club, and that kind of, got us going because we were looking for a story, and it certainly is a good one. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I blame Lloyd Kaplan for all my for all this. And as you said, Rich, I'm working with Dennis Pratt, who you've also had here
Yes.
on the book, which will be out soon. And
It will. I'm excited
it
to hear
will,
that.
yeah. But when I started working at Dean College, I was living up in Quincy, Mass. And after a couple of years, when I realized I was going to stay there for a while, I moved down to Rhode Island. By chance, Lloyd was giving a talk about Rhode Island jazz, which I didn't really know anything about beyond maybe Bobby Hackett and Dave McKenna, So so I went to one of his talks at the Museum of Culture, Work and Culture in Woonsocket, and just talked to him, and he's such a great guy. We struck up a friendship and started talking about jazz, and before I knew it, I was working on the book. I don't know how it happened, but it did. And that's when I met, as Norm said, when we met each other through Lloyd, and we started interviewing, all these folks in the book just to capture their stories. And I was amazed, not being from Rhode Island, what a rich heritage of jazz music there is. All the folks that we interviewed had. All these guys could have went national and international, and they could have played with anybody they wanted to. And the one thing we found was that they all wanted to stay in Little Rhode Island. They had families, they had businesses, they had kids and wives and friends, and very few of them left. Even though so many of them were so great and talented, they stayed in Rhode Island, and I was amazed by that.
Yeah, me too. And in fact, jazz educators from the Northeast up here are constantly looking at Rhode Island and saying, what's in the water there, man? Because they are producing some amazing musicians.
And they still are, yeah.
In fact, not very long ago, I was on the roster of adjudicators for the jazz festivals down at Rhode Island, URI, in fact. Joe Perillo does a wonderful job there, yeah. And so I was judging big band festivals and got a chance to see the senior high big bands. In fact, I was all-state director one year, the conductor for the big bands. Outstanding musicians, and their teachers are all outstanding players, yet they tend to stay pretty much in that geographic locale.
Yeah.
So what grounds them there? Was there opportunity beyond what we saw here, let's say in Boston or Worcester or Springfield? Or
A lot of them just wanted to stay with their families. In fact, some of them did go on the road. Red McDonald, for instance, went on the road with Frankie Carl, and after a year or so, I guess he got married, and then his wife got pregnant, and they decided he really needed to come back to live in Rhode Island and raise a family. So he opened up a music store, gave lessons, and continued to play locally.
Yeah.
And a lot of these guys, as Norm said, they gave music lessons door to door. That's what they did. Or their family owned a music store in Rhode Island, and they worked out of there giving lessons. But it was really that sense of being with your family, where a lot of music, you hear all these, all these musicians who run away, on the road. They never see their family. Everything ends kind of tragically. It's just the opposite for most of these Rhode Island folks. They really never left. Red, guitar player, is an example of one of the folks that did. Got a taste of the road with a big band, with Frankie Carl's big band, and decided it wasn't for him and came back. You know, and most folks, I think, felt that way. They wanted to stay in Rhode Island. Rhode Island is just one big neighborhood. You know, it's not even a state. It's a neighborhood, and everybody. I'm amazed not being from there. I run into somebody and they're related to Norm because he's from Rhode Island. It's just the way it works. It's crazy.
Well, Red McDonald actually told us a story about giving Duke Robillard a guitar lesson, and then Duke wrote a song called Red's Riff about Red McDonald. So
that's great.
Stories like that.
Yeah, and that goes to speak to the mentoring that goes on in Rhode Island. From Red to Duke, and all the folks like Artie Cabral and Duke Belair, and all the folks we've interviewed for the film project and the book project. They're very proud of what they've done in the state in mentoring a lot of the folks, and a lot of the folks that came in to play at the Celebrity Club. They came for a week at a time, and then they'd come back over the years. They mentored a lot of the folks, the musicians in Rhode Island as well.
Yeah, so I've seen in the students a really deep respect for the language, jazz, but also for the teachers and this whole idea of tradition. They really somehow feel rooted in a community that has embraced them. And I don't often find that in other jazz communities, especially where the musicians, as you said, around the road are not really invested where their home base might have been, or where their family still resides even, So they're out doing whatever it is that they're doing, recording, performing, and so forth, but not necessarily giving back to the community. So Rhode Island is very special in that way, that at least from the outside, that's the way I've seen it, and obviously you as well then,
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's amazing. And so the Celebrity Club, so Norm and I, we started out working together just doing interviews with Rhode Island musicians, jazz musicians, and just getting their stories.